For your game stuff. I'm gonna go ahead, I'll get started on modern kind of things. My name's Jason, I'm the chair of the convention. I've been printing now, what, a year and a half, I guess? So I use what's called an Ender 5, which is a good starting printer. And I do kind of a variety of different printings.
I'm Andrew Mayer. I've been designing more games and stuff for I think it's 30 years officially as of this month. Yeah, I've just been printing for a couple of months. I got a Prusa Mini, which I guess is what's going to be showing up here, which is a great starting printer, but not the cheapest, by far not the cheapest choice.
Yeah. So I think you're going to focus on what we've discovered. Obviously, none of us, the third gentleman who will be joining us, probably actually got more experience than the two of us put together doing this. But none of us, all of us together, is less than 5 years, I believe. Hey there. So sorry.
Which is actually probably my lesson is learning is like waiting till now was definitely a good thing.
Yep.
Okay. Is that's a modded Prusa Mini?
No.
That's not a Prusa.
That is a mostly, well, that is a partially stock Ender 3.
Okay, wow.
Okay, so, all right, so we've done introductions.
So introduce yourself.
All right. My name is Adrian Koester. I am, at least at Con this year, in charge of game library. I am also relatively well versed in this art. I've been doing this for almost 4 years.
We did about 6 years and with all three of us together.
So, which, in anything IT tech terms, is most of a lifetime. So,
Especially when it comes to this stuff.
yeah.
I was just about to say, like, I'm really glad. I just grabbed mine earlier. I've been deep in it, but and it's getting deeper every day. But I'm looking at what people have to go through, even like 2 years ago, compared to what's going on now.
Yep. We'll give Adrian a second to get himself set up because I believe you're going to start a print to run.
That's the idea.
Okay, we'll let him work with us on that while we kind of talk about some of the things we've been doing with it. Like neither of us have been doing it very long. I mean, Adrian's got the experience, but the things you can do with it for gaming nowadays, between making prototype parts for games, I'm sure you've probably done a few of those.
Working on it,
yep. Dice towers, I mean, some of these things that come out you get simple dice towers as this one. The multi-part one, like this one, which is currently missing a part that fell on the way here. It actually completely assemblable and uses an actual water bottle. Or the complicated, really pretty one. But it's a labor of love to learn it. But everything we do here is just personalized and done for each game. So, I mean, you've got storage devices there. I'm talking about what you got on those things. So.
Yeah. So what I've been really focusing on trying to get to up to game insert upgrade stuff. So so this one is mostly complete. This is for Quacks, and like what I did and what I'm really happy about is just getting a frame on all the pieces, and then the pieces go in these little boxes, which both for storage and for play. And the trick, if you know Quacks at all, like the three pieces of the boxes are split. So you can see all this, so you don't have to like pull them from a thing. And then for all these boxes, you just put the spell book right on the back. And there's lots of inventiveness. I'm really always impressed, like with how much inventiveness is in here. And then this is for Ethnos, which actually is a pretty good insert. But I'm working on this one, and then all the pieces go into the insert.
The insert's prettier than the game is.
Yeah, and it's John Howe. You got to give it some credit. And then all the cards go into these cards, which are actually. These are a remix. So once you get into it, if you have a printer, there's a bunch of different websites you can go to. Thingiverse is the old favorite, My Mini Factory, Cults, yep. All those other places. And what a lot of people, and Prusa Prusa printers.org or whatever. And then this is actually a remix from another game. So a lot of people will share. There's a lot of sharing.
A lot of sharing.
It's a lot like the old days of like software and stuff like that, where people are still willing to share. Maybe changing in the next couple of years, we'll see. But for now, so those are the two that I'm working on, and then I have some plans to start. I have a bunch of ones I've already bought inserts for, and I have plans to start upgrading, like Concordia, which I'd like to do, and maybe I'll even start making some stuff, some Roman themed. Like these boxes are very plain. If there's these are a remix of a box that somebody created for just the base. These are too big with the frames on them, but they look like chests, which are nice. So people, you can do a lot more. You can get a lot more detail.
And my first one is I'm Lost Ruins of Arnak. I'm creating all the pieces, the cardboard shits in it. I want to get some nice pieces and paint them up. But I think everything we've got here is unpainted.
Yes.
None of this is painted. This is actually the color of the filament we chose. And some of it is everything from single colors, the multicolors. This is actually a color change filament I found. That was a very slow color change. I had some filament that actually was heat sensitive. That was a mistake buy. It was so touchy. But then you have the wood that he's got there.
Yeah.
Those wands are actually made of a wood poly blend.
Yeah, it's basically sawdust infused PLA, polylactic acid, which is a cornstarch based plastic, which is the vast majority of what all this stuff is.
I think almost all of it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a number of different materials that you can print in, getting more specialized all the time. PLA is the most common. It's the most forgiving. Environmentally, it's the most friendly. They say since it's plant-based, it's biodegradable. Yeah.
Give or take 1,000 years.
Give or take 100 years or so. But either way, what it isn't is petroleum-based. So there's a little bit of a win there.
And then there's PETG, which is a little less.
PETG, which is basically pop bottles.
Yep. And in fact, a friend of mine just sent me a kilogram of pop bottle reconstituted filament.
So. And there's ABS, which is very strong but kind of nasty stuff. Yeah, there's all sorts of different options. I mean, there's carbon fiber infused filaments. There's metal infused filaments. But then plastics being what they are, they all have different properties for different purposes. And you can do lots of wonderful things.
Yeah. And even within the subsets, there are subsets. So PLA, like I said, most of this is PLA except for his wood. But I believe this is just straight PLA, right?
Straight PLA.
Versus this, which is probably the same color, except this is called silk PLA. So it has that little bit of a shine to it.
Yeah, this one also is silk.
That's a silk PLA?
Yep. Which
is actually, of all PLAs, is one of my favorite to play with. Because I get that shine on the little things. This one I use it in a regular PLA. But then there's a couple of new ones. The PLA Plus is coming out now.
That's a PLA Plus.
Is it?
Yeah, this one's
PLA Plus has some extra additives to it to make it stronger.
That's this stuff is PLA. This purple is PLA Plus.
Yeah.
So it really sort of depends on what you want to do with it, how you want to do it. I like to think of 3D printing as a lot of what, why, and how.
And WTF.
Yeah. A real key for starting point, and this is probably the most important key piece of information with 3D printing as a whole, is this is a hobby. This is not a tool. Because this has not gotten to the point yet in its ease of use and development. This is not plug and play. If you're going into this, know that this is a hobby in and of itself. We're all gamers, we're all hobbyists, we all have more than one hobby. This is going to be one of them, because inevitably this requires tinkering.
Oh yeah.
And if you want something that is not tinker-worthy, or requires plug and play, they do exist. You're going to spend money on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and even then.
And even then, not really, because
it's
still it's fun. You can do wonderful things, but it's like a car. It requires tuning, and more importantly, it's like a kit car.
Yeah.
Because inevitably you will find something that you don't like, and you want to do upgrades. You want to add stuff, as I have clearly done.
Well, you've added that tool. I know that tool holder's an add-on.
Yeah. So what that is is, pass that around.
While you're passing that around, can I time out for just a second? We're looking for the owner of a silver Toyota Hybrid, Oregon license plate 999, Echo X-ray Kilo. Anybody?
Nope.
Awesome. I'm going to try and find who has their lights on.
But, so what that is let me take a step back. Another thing that is notoriously difficult in the world of 3D printing is doing multiple colors. You can do multicolor printing. There are machines that do that. They're expensive. There are even setups where you can do many colors. They're very expensive. This is more of a creative hack.
Is that your Sharpie one?
That's the Sharpie
Oh,
one.
you got a Sharpie one, okay.
This is a creative hack. So basically what somebody figured out is that if you print something in a clear filament, that they figured out a bunch of creative code where between each layer, like every other layer, you can send this print head up to a rack of Sharpie markers. Pick one up, send it down, and color in the segment that you want to color. And is this going to cooperate for me? Yeah, I think so. Yep. And then you do that, and it takes forever. I mean, that little multicolored lizard probably took 14 hours to print.
But you're not doing anything. It's doing all the work.
It's doing all the work. The only risk for long prints like that is your Sharpie's drying out. But the great thing about that system, relative to some of the other options for multicolor printing, is that I'm only out $12, $15, and most of that was the cost of the Sharpies.
Yeah.
All of the other mountings, I printed myself. Everything else is code. But yeah, I mean, you see on here, all the little black and gray plastic bits is stuff that was my modifications, was models that I found to make this whole experience easier, better, whatever. And that's half the fun of this, is that experience. Now, if I wanted to bring down so much more stuff, but if you're interested in other examples of the things you can print, come up to library. I have stacks of inserts, some of which are things that,
Are you going to get spaghetti?
not spaghetti, but something didn't stick right, so
Yeah,
I'm
I
going to
get the
stop
first layer.
this.
Okay. So let's go ahead and take a step back here real quick, since we've only got a couple people in the panel, and ask what you guys, what you were interested in the 3D printing. Are you guys already printing? You have questions, or what are you thinking? So we'll start with you.
Well, now you got that so quiet. I have it in your 3, and it's just much fun.
Yes. Okay, so basically, one of those upgrades that I mentioned it was an upgraded board.
The silent motherboard?
The silent motherboard.
Probably the most loved by me, most hated by my wife upgrade I did to my Ender 5 was adding the silent motherboard, because as she said, it no longer sings.
Yeah. The original board for the stock Ender 3s, the stepper motor drivers are noisy. Now, for a long time, I didn't care, because this was sitting in my basement, and I didn't care. But the other problem with that original board is that it doesn't allow for any other easy upgrades. Like it's not easy at all, not impossible, but it's not easy at all to do firmware updates because it doesn't have a bootloader on it. You can't add anything else really. So like my BL Touch here for auto bed leveling, almost not possible on the original board. So that was one of the things that I did, is I got the upgraded Creality board. And that's where the silent stepper motor drivers come in.
So what about you?
Well, I haven't started printing yet. I've slowly been adding, so I bought probably a stock Ender 3, but not from Creality.
That's not
So
unusual.
I think SaintSmart is the company. that I bought.
Which is exactly what this is. Actually.
Right. Yeah. So and then I've upgraded the tube, so it's a Teflon coated tube. I upgraded to a brass nozzle. I bought a tempered glass printing bed, but I didn't print anything before I bought it, so I don't know if that's better or not better.
Print beds really depend on the material.
Yeah, so the thing with glass, where glass is handy is sometimes on budget 3D printers, the aluminum print bed is not particularly flat.
Okay.
Or I should say not precisely flat. You get a little bit of variation. For something the size of an Ender 3, it is usually not a huge problem, but when precision matters, it can make a difference. Glass largely fixes that.
Yep.
Because glass beds are pretty well guaranteed to be flat.
Yeah.
And the only real issue I ran into was that the clips that came with it to hold the original bed
Yep.
on it don't work. The glass is too thick.
Yeah.
Binder clip.
Binder clips.
Okay, so I got bigger binder clips. What I ran into there was when I was trying to level the bed, I had to move the clips because it was hitting the clips because the clips.
So you
was that
should be
much
able
bigger.
to readjust a permanent readjustment of the clip
Right.
position. I had to do that with mine as well because I use a glass. I have a glass bed with a tempered surface on it, so it's got a little bit of a give to it, and that worked for mine.
Yeah.
But I started with the Ender 5. It comes with a magnetic bed, which is a magnetic sheet that you can peel off.
Pie, like a pie sheet.
Right. The problem was it creased like within my first 20 prints. I'm just like, glass bed and purple glue sticks.
Yeah.
The washable glue sticks. You run that over that thing to get the adhesion you need. I don't think I've had a single piece slide in my last 30 prints.
Make sure you get the right glue then.
Yeah, that is
just
just
the Elmer's-
purple.
The
Yeah.
Elmer's purple, yeah.
Bed adhesion is, and again, depending on the material, is sort of the bane of everybody's existence when it comes to 3D printing, because there are few things more annoying than getting like 14 hours into a 16-hour print and having something break loose.
Yeah, for the whole
Or
thing.
you walk away from your house for the day, not think about it. You come home after a 14-hour print, it broke in hour 2, and all you come home to with, like we call it, it's spaghetti.
Yeah, you get, so
I
there
wanna have
are
one of those next week.
there are a number of options there. And again, it varies depending on the material. Things like PETG and ABS are much more, and nylon especially, are much more sensitive to, they're harder to stick down. Glue stick, Aquanet is popular
Windex, right?
on glass.
I tried the opposite. I didn't have much luck with it on the glass bed, but I've heard it's good.
Yeah. Blue painter's tape, I had good luck with. But these textured PEI sheets, I've had good luck with lately.
Yeah, I love those. That's what I've gotten. I'm loving it.
Once you upgrade to those, you're getting you're getting worried that you're gonna snap it.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, because like this one, this is basically the same thing that Jason had to begin with. Mine hasn't creased, but you also can get those PEI sheets on spring steel.
Yeah, that's what I've got.
And those are really nice
can't- you
because you can't crease it.
You can just do. You can
You
flex
just
it any way
flex
you
it
want.
just a little bit. The print, unless you have structural problems within the print itself, it'll just pop right off.
Especially if you let it cool first.
Yes.
For the other stuff.
And for a lot of things, especially glass, and especially if you have one of the coated glass sheets, a lot of times, if you let it cool all the way, it'll self-release.
Right.
You don't got to do anything.
Because glass you can't twist, right? There's zero.
So this particular one, because it has such a huge surface area, I actually, even though you don't need it for this, I actually put a raft on this, which gave me that extra layer. So then when it didn't, if it stuck, the best tool I have in my thing is the scraper that you get to start with, so I could give it that pop and not damage the bottom of my design. There it is.
These some of them. Well, this is an early one I did, so I didn't have the nozzle close enough, so it's picked up some interesting artifacting. But yeah, it's also like, you know, what bed you print on is also going to leave something on your
Yep.
print.
Yeah,
So.
if you're not particular about what your bottom surface is like, it usually doesn't matter a whole lot.
Yep.
But glass, one of the other advantages of glass is it does tend to leave a nice smooth bottom surface.
Yep.
But yeah, since the vast majority of the stuff that I print is structural rather than pretty, I don't care so much about surface. And for things like these, if I do, I'm probably going to be doing sand prime paint. Filler primer is your friend, by the way, for things like this. A thin layer of filler primer will generally cover up any defects or layer lines. I think it's actually
Which
pretty
side?
good.
How do you print? Like, how do you print?
Okay, so this is why I have two examples of this. So I did these two wands in two different ways. This one I was printed like this with support mirror under it, and if you look closely at the bottom, you can see the scarring from that support material. Since I didn't really like that, that's why I printed these two differently. Now, I have recently switched slicers. I used, when I started, Cura was the most accessible. It is what generally came with the printer, and what was most of the videos and stuff that I was watching for people who weren't willing to pay for Prusa Slicer or Simplify 3D or whatever to use. Cura is fine, but I got progressively annoyed with Cura because a lot of the bells and whistles are difficult to find. So a relatively recent addition into the slicer world is a thing called Super Slicer, which is sort of a free offshoot of Prusa Slicer. And it has a function where you can take an odd-shaped model and it will automatically slice it in half and put the two halves flat on your build plate.
Oh, really? Huh.
At which point, when they're done, you just glue them together. And and any sort of edging, elephant's foot or whatever that you have around the edges, you can just shave or sand.
Can you
right
cut
off.
an object into smaller objects natively inside the app, or no?
Inside that, probably not so much. This particular one printed in 4 pieces.
Okay.
If you look carefully, there's a join here in the middle.
How did you cut it?
Well, this was the designer
Cut it.
this
Okay.
way because there's actually a tenon in here that was designed into the model.
Okay.
So I can actually, this guy's not glued yet.
Yeah.
So I printed this as 2 halves, and then they came up with the pegs that I can, once I get the staff to put this on, then it will just attach together and go on a stick.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the nice things about the prevalence, the extreme prevalence of the Ender series of printers, because since they all have the same build volume, is people who make models know that probably 80% of the printers in the world have this size.
Yep.
So if something is very long and isn't going to fit on a build plate, even diagonally, that's 235 square, they cut their models such that you can make it fit.
Yeah, very tall is another one.
Yeah.
The Prusa Mini will not print this. So when they released it, there's an STL for the whole thing, and another one that stops about here, and you print it in 2 halves.
Yeah.
I mean, you could get close, but yeah, not all the way up there.
Yeah. Well, the original tower was also about here.
Oh,
so.
okay, yeah. That's fine. I think
So
it's
I mean,
80
the
millimeters.
model designers are cognizant of the limits of most hobby printers, and usually build things accordingly. Now, one other thing about model design is there's a conventional wisdom about printers of this type, and gaming in particular, that FDM printers like this are not known for printing very fine details.
Yes.
If you're going to be printing minis, and that's all you're going to be doing, this is probably not the printer you're going to be shooting for.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you have a printer like this and you want to print minis, you can. You just have to be careful as to what models you choose, because there are people out there who print very, very detailed, or design very, very detailed models designed for printers like this. Again, if you come up to the library, I have a chess set up there. If you want to see what things like what a tuned Ender 3 is capable of, come take a look, because you can get wonderful results. It just takes some time getting things dialed in, getting your tolerances dialed in, making sure your bed is level, make sure your extrusion rates are all.
There's a YouTube channel, is it from the Fat Dragon guy? I can't remember.
There's
Monsters. Anyway, it's entirely dedicated to printing minis on FDM.
Yeah, Tube of 3D printed
That's
horrors.
it. That's the one. Yep.
Which is the guy who pretty much got me through all of my early days of 3D printing, because he has, especially for an Ender 3, because he pretty much, I mean, that's what he does all of his on, but he has dedicated videos to printing, how to do your slicer profiles, how to get good results for printing minis, printing terrain, and then he has like whole series on painting, on making it look pretty. Wonderful channel.
One thing I wanted to say, like, you know, because I've been doing software development and game design stuff forever and ever. Like, if you like troubleshooting, this is your,
Yeah.
you know, because like I was just putting through my head, like when you consider like figuring out what your project is, getting it through the slice, getting it modeled, slicing it, which is for your printer, setting it up, all that stuff, figuring it out. You know, making sure your filament is okay that you're feeding into it, making sure that you know, like just thinking about all, you know, that the bed is working right, that the heaters are working right, that everything is going well. Like I ran into my first real troubleshooting problem, and you know, yeah, and it's not, and like the other thing that I'll say I learned from that is like when you solve a problem in software, it's done, it works, right? You've changed it because it's all virtual. Here, like I had a problem for printing something. Actually, was trying to get these things printed. This filament, so I printed something in white. It worked perfectly. This was a problem. I kept trying to fix it. I ended up like redoing a bunch of stuff with the nozzle, having to learn how to, you know, doing a bunch of pulls, which is trying to fish stuff out of your printer. Then, like this print, then I did all that. This printed, and then the next print I started to do with the same filament went back to the exact same problem. And I was like, oh, okay, the filament's wet. Like I had to go through all of that twice to come back around to realize that ultimately, even though this worked, even though I got this off the printer, it was still the problem. It was still the filament at the end of the day.
Which, humidity will kill you, because PLA and other plastics will absorb moisture like nothing else. And there are ways to work around that. The only real good way to fix it is to basically have a dehydrator or something to be able to dry out filament. Because if your filament absorbs too much moisture, it's not going to cooperate for you. It'll be all sorts of fiddly, and it'll just cause frustration.
Right, but I will say the other thing is every step of the nightmare that I have to go through to get it working again, and is something I learned about the printer that I will know for next time. Like, just even something like, because it's a voted tube system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just even when the crappy filament, I couldn't get it, it wouldn't retract, it wouldn't pull back. I couldn't unload it. So I had to get in there and pop the Bowden tube out, and just like learning to push some filament out so the tube will come up, right? Just like little things, like tricks like that I now know about my printer that I didn't know about before. Like, it's interesting. I mean, it is it's troubleshooting. Like, if you enjoy that, it's going to be great. Like, I had to bring all my skills to bear to figure out.
Well, it's not even just the machine; it's the filaments itself. Just changing from one filament to another, even the same type to a different color, the different product that got it made, how it was made. Your temperatures can be completely different.
Manufacturers.
We have a spreadsheet that we know if we bought this particular filament, this particular type of color, these are our bed temps, this is my nozzle temps. And we change it for size. I can print this one at 210, but this is the same one might run at 190. And it's just huge. Every time I load a new run of filament, the first thing I do, I have a little set of 10 meeples. I found it's a 7-minute print. And we print that for everything, and it's our test run. Because Benchy's cool, but these meeples I can use. So we print them out on every print run and just kind of keep them in track. Because if it fails, I'm not out a whole bunch of filament, but I learned a lot. And you mentioned the Bowden tube. I went through 5 Bowden tubes, 2 nozzles, and a heat sink before I realized that my part cooling fan had died.
Yeah, the heatsink fan was dead.
So it's always a bit of, it's amazing to me that like so many people are into it, because it's always a little bit of this and that, but it's everything all at once. And then like, just to keep going there, right? Like suddenly working on that project, like I realized it's like back pressure coming, because when that plastic hits the nozzle, it's turning to liquid, and there's pressure going on there, and so you're in liquid dynamics as well as like all the. I mean, so it's just rabbit holes all the way down. Like you can jump down, like So, but it cleared up. Like realizing that like there's a whole thing with back pressure from the liquid and the pressure on the nozzle was like, oh, now I understand what these people are talking about when they're talking about all this different stuff. So it's an adventure. It's a hobby.
The funny thing is, the most important tool I picked up that I didn't pay a dime for is those samples they send you when you buy filament online. So you're having problems with Bowden tubes. I actually now keep these pieces that are about this long.
Just to shove through.
I literally will disconnect my Bowden tube and just like crank it up to 250 and go push that through to clean the nozzles out. It's the fastest way I found to clean that thing out for a fresh run.
Yeah, and then doing a cold pull, which I hadn't done before.
Yeah, I haven't done a pure cold pull yet. But
so it's cold pull is you push your filament through at a high heat, and then you let it cool down to what, 190? No, 90, just under 100.
Just under 100,
and then you grab it and you pull it out, and it's still stretchy, and it'll grab any like junk that's still in there.
Yep.
And it feels like I feel like I want to apologize to the machine when I do it.
Yeah.
But it does work.
But yeah, all the little things that we talk about. I mean, the other one I have a problem in my personal house because of the way I keep my house temperature is ambient temperature. Actually, really hits me. I had to buy an enclosure for mine, just because my house temperature varied too much. I needed that solid, constant temperature, and it lets me print ABS if I want to. Not that I'm ever going to do that again.
Yeah, my brain now on it is enjoy it while it, like my thing is like if nothing's wrong and I can enjoy it, I'll enjoy it while I'm doing it.
Yep.
And I'm just going to write it out and not try to get too crazy into detail. And then when something goes wrong, then I'll turn into like problem solving guy and like and do all the other stuff. Because there are moments like where just everything goes along swimmingly and everything's really happy.
And then there's moments when you tell your wife, I'm throwing it in the trash because you can't figure out what's wrong.
But patience is a virtue, because like for example, one of the things that I wanted to do for this is I specifically put an enormous nozzle on this thing. I've got a 1mm nozzle sitting on this printer right now, and because the goal was to print one of these, something big and quick.
Yeah.
Now, the spool of black that I printed that on is out in my car, but I happened to grab this clear stuff first, and like Jason said, different colors don't always behave the same, and this one was clearly not cooperating today. So,
Yep, that's not. It looks like he doesn't like you.
and see that's the other thing with that. I've been in IT a long time, and one of the adages that I have lived by is that everything electronic is inhabited by malicious spirits, and the more complicated the system, and the more urgently you need it to work, the more actively it will work against you. If you're in a hurry, things will decide to not cooperate. So patience is a virtue. It also means that photocopiers are the most malevolent things on the face of the earth. But anywho, but yeah, patience is a virtue. You will have things that fail. You cannot get into this and be afraid of things going wrong, because things will go wrong.
You're gonna waste some plastic.
You're gonna waste some plastic. However, knowing that you are going to waste some plastic is not a good reason to go super cheap when you're buying materials.
No.
Bargain basement filament on Amazon is usually not worth it.
Yep.
You don't have to go super expensive, but as a general rule, if you're spending less than 18 to 20 bucks per kilo of filament, it's not worth buying.
That's about the right. Yeah, I've got a couple of successes, but usually from minor prints. But yeah, you know. Now, granted, disclaimer: I work at a place that sells 3D printing stuff, including filament.
Yeah.
Bought lots of it, and so we've got eSun, which is a nice middle of the road.
Yeah.
It's not the top of the line, but it's a good, solid middle of the road.
Yeah,
one.
eSun, Hatchbox,
Sunly is the other one.
Sunroot, yeah.
That's this one, but that's the stuff I've been having
But like,
Yeah.
some problems with.
but like the last Prime Day, I found a deal on some black PLA Plus,
PLS.
fiddliest crap I've ever worked with in my life.
I got that same front deal, it's been everything inside.
Yeah, that Coos PLA Plus.
It's
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah.
But yeah, but the thing is, I mean, the total cost of what he lost there in that piece is probably maybe even 95 cents.
Pennies.
What you lose is going to be minimal. Now, printing this, I made one major mistake. The very first time I said it, I told I wanted 100% infill. I have a block about this tall of 100% filament that is just a brick.
Awesome.
So
I use it as a doorstop in the summer.
this is now, but this actually this is roughly 1 kilogram of
Okay,
filament, even
cool.
cut down. That's one roll. So all this stuff, I think with the exception of this, everything on this table is maybe 1 kilogram. Maybe. And that he pushed it. That's including all your boxes.
Yep.
Well, your insert
This-
here
this-
might be a little bit.
I think this was like a third of a roll, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. But yeah.
So, yeah.
I have a question for everyone on
This
the
is
panel.
15% though, 50% gyro.
You accept that you're going to have plastic waste. Have you ever found a way of any sort to repurpose that waste?
That is the holy grail of printing right at the moment.
Oh yeah.
There's a guy on YouTube I watched, and what he does with it is, I couldn't figure it out because he said, so he's running a print farm, which is like a whole, thing where you're printing for Etsy people and stuff full time. So what he does is he does all these busts, and I couldn't figure out what he meant by filling in. I think what he does is at a certain point in the print, he's ground it all up, and he just pours it into the infill spaces so that there's some weight at the bottom. Like he's actually just grinding it up and reusing it as just a sand, basically.
So
Now I do know here in Portland, one of the guys in the local 3D printing group actually does have a PLA reconstitutor. Basically, he takes PLA pellets and old filament, melts it down, and re-extrudes it.
yeah,
But it's in the thousands, a multi-$1,000 machine.
yeah. The real so there are machines out there that can take small pieces of PLA and re-extrude it into filament. The hardest part about taking your printed waste is getting it down to a uniform size.
Grinder, yeah.
And so the most important piece of equipment is your grinder. Now, those of us that are hobbyists and are doing this on the cheap end up, most often what they do is they end up going to Goodwill and finding a piece of crap blender and running their old prints through that. Don't ever do that with anything that's 100% infill. You will break your blender. But even then, you spend hours and hours blending and reblending, and you end up with some of it that's powder, some of it that's the right size of confetti, and then you still have to have the system with the hopper. It feeds it all into a melter and extrude it out, and trying to get that consistently done is really, really hard. And there are machines that can do it, but they, like Jason said, they cost thousands of dollars. There's plans where you can kind of make things on your own, but those still cost a fair amount of money with all the parts. And yeah. What I'm looking, there's a number of places that in pre-COVID times had some sort of arrangement where you could send them boxes of your waste and they would give you some credits towards their new filament. The two places that I was aware of that were doing that largely went up in COVID smoke.
And you have to like absolutely separate your filaments.
Yes,
Your
yeah,
wastes.
and that's the other thing. You have to be religious about separating your materials. Now, for me, that's not a big deal since I print pretty well exclusively in PLA. The only thing I have to keep out is I just have to make sure whenever I'm printing wood that I don't.
Can you put the plus into the regular PLA?
I think at least the one place I was going to send, they said that wasn't a problem.
Okay, cool.
The main things that they complain about is getting bits of ABS and PETG in there because they melt a lot higher, and
clog away.
And the sawdust in wood filament just mucks everything up. And anything with like abrasives and such, it just makes the consistency really hard.
Glitter filament is
Glitter filament. Oh God, I love it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and that's part of the rabbit hole you dive into with this hobby is that you the specialized stuff that you can get into introduces new challenges, new headaches. Because like with standard PLA and inexpensive brass nozzles, you could print on the same nozzle for months and probably be okay. A few prints of wood, or God help you, metal or carbon fiber, in a week or so of that, you're probably going to need to replace your nozzle because it's just abraded the brass. It's not going to be consistently extruding anymore. People who do a lot of that stuff, a lot of the glitter filaments and the glow-in-the-dark filaments and the wood and the carbon fiber nylons and such, you're buying hardened steel nozzles, which is more expensive, but something you have to do.
And you've changed your temperature profile. So
And you've changed all your temperature profiles and such.
So you have a whole bunch of new problems to
But,
enjoy your way through.
But speaking of calibration, because if you want good, detailed, consistent results out of your printer, having a calibration routine. Jason talked about his meeples that he prints is a good habit to get into. And there's another website or YouTuber out there. He's based in Australia. The site is called Teaching Tech.
Yeah, he's great.
Absolutely fantastic. He has a GitHub page that has a massive step-by-step procedure for calibrating your printer and you can put in different parameters, and it will spit out the G code that you can then run prints and do your temperature stacks and figure out where to dial in your temperature, where to dial in your retraction settings, and all of that fun stuff. It's wonderfully useful. His reviews are fantastic. It's a good.
He's not the most scintillating personality when you first get started with him, but I will say that he is very thorough and like
very thorough, extremely knowledgeable,
and not hard to listen to. I mean, not speaking in like weird. Like I learned a lot, and even when I'm in the last few months, like right from the beginning. So
yeah.
There's plenty of tool other than doing. Benchy's your friend.
Yeah, Benchy's in your friend. Little calibration cubes.
Yep.
There's little XYZ cubes.
Temperature towers.
Temperature towers.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Just lots of
like
little things.
The temperature tower prints the same, like each line of the same thing in a bunch of lines with the temperature printed on the side. And my friend had sent me this PETG made from Pop-Offs, and he wanted me to print out some parts for his robot car. And I had not run a temperature tower in before, and I ran it, and I was sitting around, and then I was reading, and somebody's like, you need to break your tower and see. You're not only, the reason it's got it shaped the way it is, it's not only shaped that way to show you how good it does, but when you snap it, it tells you at some temperatures your filament will be strong, and others it'll be weak. So I did that, and it just fell apart on one end, and it was rock solid, unbreakable on the other. And so I knew what temperature to print his parts at, that it would, his robot combat car has the best chance of not breaking from the pieces like that.
And you'll find that when you're digging around on YouTube for 3D print resources, which I totally recommend doing. There's some wonderful ones out there. We've mentioned a couple already. But all of these guys have secondary hobbies too. And there's another Aussie out there, channel is Maker's Muse.
He's good.
And like one of his secondary passions is RC cars. So you'll see a lot of things that he does on his channel, where he's making custom parts for RC cars.
There's another guy, I can't remember his name. He wears the monocle. He has a monocle to read. He built something, but anyway, he's really into Nerf guns.
Yeah.
And like, there's a whole Nerf gun. Like, people are making these amazing
Nerf gun modding.
Nerf gun modding and like making high, like
itself.
all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah, they're getting really into it. It's very, very cool to see the different hobbies that are coming out of this. People are doing.
All right, so we're coming up on 2 o'clock, which we set the panel for 90 minutes specifically because there's bits and things and stuff. But does anybody have any questions or curiosity about what we work on? Yeah.
At first I never saw it, but now I'm starting to get wisping. Just like little wisps will come off or
Stringing. Yeah.
Stringing, yeah. So that most often, I mean that is very much going to be material dependent. Some filaments will string worse than others. So basically, what's happening there is when you're printing a lot of things that are like tall and thin, it will stop extruding when it goes from a layer on one piece and you're moving and you're doing the travel. But because of the nature of liquid plastic, it doesn't stop right away.
Oozing out of the
so it's always oozing a little bit. That's where retraction settings come in. And in those all those calibration sites, there's retraction towers that you can print to help you dial in those retraction settings.
Literally, how much is it pulling back the filament between when it lifts to go off to something else?
How much is it pulling back? How fast is it pulling back?
How much is it pushing forward? Because you don't want to push forward because there's still some ooze in there, so you may not want to put as much back in as you pulled out.
Yeah.
Like,
so
yeah.
there's lots of that's part of the calibration into it. And then there are some materials where.
Sorry, I gotta go.
Oh, fair enough.
But thanks very much. I learned a lot from you, so that's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Stop by the library.
I will definitely. I want to see some of those prints.
But anyway, some materials
Thanks for
trying
having me.
to stop stringing is nearly impossible.
I didn't change my school, I didn't change my stuff, just
Well,
one day starts stringing.
yeah,
Your filament could have changed its humidity.
yeah, humidity absorption, and sometimes, you know what? And again, this goes back to the malevolent gremlins that I talked about earlier. I've had issues where I have a G code that I have printed successfully before, I print it again, for whatever reason, it is not working.
Yeah.
So I take the same model, I go back, I slice it again, it works. Why? I don't know. But sometimes that is just what you have to do. And like, and every once in a while, when you have a printer that was printing well and consistently, and then it starts to not print consistently, a lot of times that's when it's time to start maintenance. So like I was having a lot of, there for a while I was having some really strange extrusion problems, where I was having a lot of under extrusion, clumping, whatever, and I ended up, I tried just changing the nozzle, because I thought the nozzle might be clogged or worn or something, because I had changed that nozzle in a year and a half. But that wasn't quite it. So I ended up basically taking the whole hot end apart, and it was full of gunk. It was just full of crap. And I got it all cleaned out, and I got it put back together. I got everything snugged up and tightened up, and then it printed beautifully again for several weeks. So, or things, simple things like making sure belts are tight, making sure like your Z screw is lubricated and cleaned periodically. I wasn't kidding about the kit car reference. The parallels are scary.
Anyone else?
What kind of enclosure did you buy?
So I actually went name brand. I messed around because, so I got the Ender 5 actual Creality enclosure. So it's a big aluminum frame with basically a tent covering.
So it's a soft fabric-y.
It is a soft fabric-y.
That weird.
With the aluminum inside, yeah.
Yep. The funny thing about it is because of its specific dimensions, and then this is not a plug, but take it for what it is. The dimensions of it are the exact same size as the IKEA large, medium-sized table dimensions, which magically fit right between my two bookshelves in my library. So it was like this. This is my new print home.
Did you buy that before or after you got the sound motherboard?
I got it after. It was the last upgraded thing I bought. It was, yeah.
I bought a different brand. It's the same concept. This is a plastic, it's a PVC plastic pipe frame.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. It's a tent with reflective material on the inside.
Yeah.
I was wondering how much that helped the sound, if at all. And then, do you keep the filament inside, the spool filament inside?
I do.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is right now mine lives in the garage. And for a lot of the year, that's probably okay, but I either stop printing in the winter, or one of the reasons I bought the enclosure was to help regulate temperature, and I wondered if it would help regulate the spool. My concern being the temperature on the outside of the spool when it starts will be different than the inside, and how does that matter as you go through the print? Because, or does it move the filament slowly enough that it all sort of warms up the same?
You should be able to move up, but if you're going to do that, if you're doing that extreme temperature, like a garage where you're going down to 40 degrees at night, you might look at getting one of those. Like I have the Sunloo humidity warmer. I can warm sit my rule in there, plug it in, and it will keep the humidity and the reel warm while it runs for a 12-hour print.
So it runs out of the warmer into the
Directly into my extruder, directly into my machine.
And the main purpose of those dry boxes is really humidity. Because if you think about it, you're going, under normal circumstances, you're going from filament that's at room temperature to 210 degrees Celsius within the space of millimeters. So my gut feeling is that I'm going from like 10 degrees C to 200 in a short period of time versus like 25 C to 200, probably not a big deal.
Yeah.
Humidity is going to be your bigger problem.
I read different things online because I did notice like there's a pretty significant change between like what we heat the house at and the garages get pretty chilly, which is why I bought the enclosure that I bought. Now it just so happens that there are online places like SaintSmart has eagles a lot. So
Right.
I got the enclosure for like $40.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's not it wasn't a painful buy. They got it in the bundle, so I got 2 rolls of SaintSmart PLA to go with it. So for me, I'm just trying to figure out like, do I need to keep it, like, does it matter to keep it in there? Or if the issue is humidity, maybe I just get the dry box and run it out of the dry box into the tin. The other nice thing about the tin is it keeps the printer clean.
Yeah, that is.
For in a garage, yes.
Yes.
I mean, that's
That's
critically
another
important.
big thing. You have to
Which
right,
is potentially another bonus to having your spool in there, because
Yeah.
gunk, dust and gunk on the filament is only going to make your life miserable. The primary design purpose of those enclosures is to regulate how quickly this
Okay.
cools down.
Mm-hmm.
Because particularly when you're dealing with things like PETG and ABS, especially on big prints, plastic contracts slightly as it cools off. So you've got a heated bed that's at 50 to 60 degrees C, or up to 90 to 100 for ABS. As it gets away from that plate, it's going to cool off, and the outside is going to cool off much faster than the middle, which means you have corners lifting.
Yep.
That's really what an enclosure is supposed to prevent,
Yeah.
is maintaining that temperature at roughly the glass point of your plastic so that it doesn't warp.
Right. Yeah, this was actually one of my early prints was this. In that example, before I got the enclosure, I tried printing this thing. I got it in, printed both halves, went to put it together, and I had a smile that was like this.
Yeah.
Because the temperature was unregulated enough that it all warped out on me. So,
You had a cleft lip.
yep.
Do you guys run your prints remotely?
You
Sort of.
do, kind of.
Is that what I think it is?
That is a Raspberry Pi.
Burning Octopi?
Yes.
Okay.
I have not set mine up yet
Sure.
because of where mine's at in my house. I just haven't had time.
Yeah. An Octoprint is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. I have mine set up. It's plugged in. I just haven't finished the process of bed leveling and printing.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that Octoprint has. This lives all of 15 feet away from my computer desk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really all that inconvenient to get up, plug in the SD card and run things locally. But the thing that I like Octoprint for is not necessarily running the print remotely, but being able to watch it.
So you use a camera plug?
I do use the camera. I haven't done a whole lot of the time-lapse thing, just because it adds time.
It's my interest in watching the print with the temperature. You can watch the
Yeah,
temperature.
and there are tools out there. There's actually a tool out there called the Spaghetti Detective, which is a plugin for Octoprint that has an accompanying phone app, where it uses a kind of a machine learning algorithm to watch the video feed of your print, and if it starts spaghettifying, it will intervene and stop it.
Stop it.
If you print a lot, you run out of free machine learning time, and they ask you for money or something. But if nothing else, you have a remote camera feed where you can keep an eye on the status of your printer. But yeah, it's.
Do you do much game, like miniatures, terrain printing? Because that's probably like that, and inserts are the type of thing that I'm most likely to do. I have some STLs for minis.
So
But mostly it's like vehicles and tires.
Right. So up at the vac station right now, there's a gentleman volunteering there. He actually has brought in some 3D printed terrain. That's what's sitting there. Absolutely gorgeous.
So let me know these things possible.
I know.
All right. I can keep going.
Yeah, you gotta grab this. I gotta go deal with this.
All right.
Saw it coming.
So, like I mentioned at the beginning, a big thing to think about when you first get into this hobby is what you want to do.
Sure.
And for me, one of the things that was the impetus of that why was not necessarily minis, but replacement parts.
Okay, good.
So when I was first getting into gaming, I was a teacher by trade, which meant I was poor. And my wife and I, one of our sort of weekend entertainments was going around to antique malls and thrift stores looking for games.
Yep.
And finding vintage stuff. And again, if I had been on top of things, I'd have them down here. But I have examples up in the library of vintage older games that were missing a piece.
Right.
And part of my goal in getting this setup was being able to recreate those pieces.
Using catapult from Conquest of Rome.
Possibly, yeah. So like for example, the three examples that I have up there. One of them is, and probably the simplest one and the one that I irritatingly enough did last, is an old game called Tippet. And it's this sort of dexterity game where you've got this. I don't know if you're familiar with Topple. It's got a kind of a platform on a spindle and little discs that you're balancing, taking on, off, whatever. So there were two pieces missing. One piece missing, one piece broken. They had these little plastic discs. One of those discs was broken, and since weight and balance is the thing, a broken disc causes problems. So I had to recreate one of those. And then there's originally what came with the game is this lifting fork to be able to lift these discs off the spindle. That was missing, so I recreated that. Another one was, there's this kind of kids pirate game that had these little wooden boats. They're probably about that long, about that high, mast to keel. And one of those boats was missing. So I recreated the boat. And then the last one, there's a game called Domain, I think, off the top. Anyway, it's sort of an Othello-like game where you're abstract, or you're putting down pieces, and pieces of your opponent's color flip over when that are touching the piece that you just placed. One of those pieces was missing, and that one was by far the hardest to do, because each piece had these pegs that had to line up with a grid of holes. So getting those precisely done was trial and error.
So did you find like Thingiverse, or did you have to design those yourself in a CAD?
For all of those three,
Yeah.
those are my own designs.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to designing parts, obviously there are options.
Mm-hmm.
There are free options, there are very expensive options, there are simple options, and there are options with a learning curve roughly along the north face of Mount Everest. I am a novice when it comes to design, so I stay simple. Tinkercad is your friend. It's free, it is entirely cloud-based online, and as long as you can work with simple shapes, you can design largely whatever the heck you want. The inserts that I have designed, or the insert pieces that I have designed, are all just combinations of additive and subtractive simple shapes. And especially when you're dealing with inserts, boxes and tubes is really all you need. Or even something like this, the meeple shape somebody else designed.
Yeah.
I took that meeple into Tinkercad and added the words, added the text to it. What was actually the biggest pain was dealing with the A and the O, and I had to put a little rectangular bridge on those pieces so that I could print this in base mode and have the letters actually work. But it just takes time. So, but like I've printed practical. I've got some plastic hangers that we have stuck to our wall with command strips that are holding up cutting boards at home. Simple things like that. Yeah, some things I find on Thingiverse, some things I find on Thingiverse and then modify slightly.
Yeah.
Some things like for my copy of Zaya, Legends of the Drift System that I have sitting up there, none of the inserts that I were finding had the solution, the particular storage solution that I was looking for, so I made my own. And ultimately it worked pretty well.
So you've never used Blender then?
I stay away from Blender, just my brain doesn't work that way. I am not a sculptor. If you're doing anything with minis and really intricate 3D shapes, Blender is an essential tool. Not me. I know of Blender, I have poked at it a little bit, and that's about where I stop. Yeah. Tinkercad is about as complicated as I can get. I mean, I've touched a little bit on Fusion 360. There are certain things that are that are much easier to do in Fusion than it is in Tinkercad. There are also things that are far easier in Tinkercad than you can do in Fusion. So it all just depends.
The problem with Fusion 360 is I have no visual imagination, so taking something flat and trying to visualize all the angles, I'm like, how's this supposed to work?
I mean, that's a problem for everybody. I mean, trying to take because in Fusion, it is theoretically relatively simple to take a flat two-dimensional picture and put boundaries on certain pieces of it and then just stretch it out into 3 dimensions. And that's one of the glorious things about Fusion. But depending on how your brain works, that's not always the easiest thing to visualize. Which is why, like a lot of what I do, I'm taking one cube and mushing it in with another cube to make a more odd shape, or taking one cube and making a slightly smaller cube in the middle that is then a negative, to carve it out and make a box. That's something that my brain has an easier time wrapping around than some of the other methods and models.